So welcome to selecting the right contractor for your project. So let me just share my screen here. There it is. All right. My name is Melissa. I've been with Kipcon for about 13 years, and I am a licensed engineer with Kipcon. I do reserve studies, transition studies, and I'm also involved in preparing specifications for remediation projects.
Melissa,
Yes.
we don't see your screen.
I'm sorry?
We don't see your screen.
Oh, let me see if I can do this. There, can you see now?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so today we're going to, as I said, we're going to move fairly quickly. So here are the topics that we're going to be covering today. Why is it a good time to perform a remediation project? Who is involved? We're going to talk about the different parties involved and their roles and who contracts with whom. We're going to discuss the construction process and the different documents that are involved in a typical remediation project. We're going to talk about how to evaluate the contractor and getting the best contract in place to minimize your risk when the project is in motion, and what's involved in contract administration and who's responsible for what duties during the project. So community associations have the unique position of reserving for projects that need to be done for replacement of common area components. So if there's a reserve study in place, the thought is, or the hope is, that you should be reserving adequate funds so that when the useful life of a component is reached and it's in poor condition, that there's enough funds there to do the project. So that's why it's important to update a reserve study regularly, because if you have an older reserve study, you may not be funding enough because costs do increase, the cost of labor, the cost of materials. So it's important to have an updated reserve study available to you so that you could make solid budgetary decisions. So the types of projects that community associations are typically involved in, I'm going to try to gear this webinar toward community associations. There's all different kinds of projects, but for community associations especially, they're tasked with saving for and performing the replacement of common elements. And here's some of the items that come up as common elements. I will tell you that paving and roofing and facades, anything to do with facades like vinyl siding or any sort of flashing work or anything like that. Those are the bigger ticket items. Paving, roofing, those are usually the most expensive. I mean, other projects such as decks can get quite large, but usually the bigger projects tend to be paving and roofing. It's also important to note that just because your reserve study says that the useful life is coming within range to do a project, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to replace it right then. You should always evaluate the condition of your components as part of that decision-making process on whether you're going to move forward with having specs prepared and actually doing remedial work on something. So also in evaluating whether now is a good time to do the project, as I mentioned, you want to look at the useful life and say, just for example, roadways have a 20-year useful life. Usually by the time you're reaching 15, 20 years on a roadway, you're starting to see enough wear and tear and doing enough maintenance on that it's probably more cost effective to remediate fully. Oftentimes you may want to upgrade certain items. Say for example, you've got a wood siding on your building, and you want something that's going to give you a longer useful life, like a hardy board or a vinyl siding. So there's upgrade projects that you could do. New amenities, things that don't already exist. I will point out that if you're constructing something new within your community, reserve study would not necessarily cover that. So new projects though do need specifications and a contractor selection to do the project properly. Sometimes bad things happen. Flooding, ice damming can do damage. So a component may not reach its full useful life. You may have a surprise where something is damaged by flooding or a storm. And obviously fire is an unfortunate event sometimes. And then energy efficiency. This falls into mostly mechanical equipment, but can involve things such as LED lighting or HVAC systems. So when you're doing a replacement project, that's a good time to consider alternatives that are quote unquote greener or more energy efficient. And we'll talk about how rebates and incentives can play into that later on. So as we discussed, there are different sources for community association funds. So one of the things before you start a project is you want to make sure that you have enough funds available to do that. So they may be funds that you already have in reserves. Sometimes a community does not have enough money for a project and it desperately needs to be completed, in which case oftentimes there may be a borrowing and then having to repay a loan or a special assessment to the members of the community. If it's damaged, there may be insurance involved. If it's an upgrade of a mechanical system, there may be incentives involved in terms of rebates or tax breaks. So you look at all your sources of funding, and then you decide whether there are enough funds there. So this is just an example of what a reserve study might look like. So you'll see the fourth column in and fifth column in from the right hand side there. You see the components have an estimated useful life. It's how long those components typically last. And then there's an estimated remaining useful life, which is based on site observations and an assessment of the condition of those particular components. So these are just some example components here. Your community may have different components than this, but as I mentioned, just because something is coming up on the end of its useful life does not necessarily mean that it should be replaced at that time. And conversely, you may have components that there's 5 years left, but it's in such poor condition that you really need to consider for safety reasons, or even the cost of maintenance annually that's happening. It might be just more cost effective in the long term to perform a replacement project. So let's talk about who is involved in a remedial project. So there's several players here. So the community association obviously is the owner. They own the community, and they'll receive the benefit from the work. The community manager is often the representative for the community association. Sometimes we deal directly with the board president or the board members, but there's oftentimes a community manager who is the owner's representative, both to the engineer and to the contractor. The association's attorney also plays a role in the project, in that there are contracts to be reviewed. There's a contract between the association and the engineer, and a contract between the association and their contractor. So those contracts would typically get reviewed by the association's attorney, and then the contracts between the parties would be completed. The engineer, if you're having specifications prepared for a project, design specifications, you would have a contract with your engineer, and the engineer would be responsible to put together a bid package for you. And we'll talk about what's included in that bid package, but it also includes the design drawings that the engineer prepares. And then the contractor, obviously, to prepare the work or to perform the work. So the engineer contracts directly with the owner, and the contractor also contracts directly with the owner. So the owner has separate contracts with both. So it starts with the engineer if you're preparing specifications, and the engineer would be, as I said, responsible for the design of those specifications. They can also assist in the bidding process and in contract administration during the work, and we'll talk about that a little later. But they can provide assistance in selecting a contractor, in that if they're involved, if the engineer is involved in the bidding process, they'll receive the bids, they'll summarize the bids, and they will review those bids and make some recommendations to the association in terms of contractor selection and the basis for that contractor selection. And as I said, providing oversight during construction. We'll talk about what that scope of responsibility is. And then the contractor also works directly for the owner, and they perform the work. They're responsible for the means and methods of construction, and they are responsible to perform the work in general conformance to the specifications prepared by the engineer. So here's just a graphic of that. There is communication between the design professional and the contractor during the project, but the contracts for each are directly with the owner. So the community managers, the owner's representative. So when the bid package goes out and the contractors are going to bid on the project, we'll often specify that the community manager is the owner's representative in the bid document. So the contractor would contact the community manager to get on site to have a look at the work and what needs to be done. So they represent the owner. The design professional is typically the engineer. Sometimes it could be an architect. It's whoever the design professional is that's going to prepare the documents that will go out to bid for the project. And then the contractor is obviously the one responsible to do the work and to deliver it for the price that they have bid. And the association's attorney, once a contractor is selected, the owner will discuss with their attorney who has reviewed the contract to get a contract into place and to get all parties agreed. So the construction documents, as I mentioned, are prepared by the engineer. So in the beginning of a project, once the association decides to move forward with a project, they'll probably ask for proposals from the engineers, and they will select an engineer to prepare the bid package. So the bid package includes the design drawings and the specifications. So the design drawings are the graphic representation of the work that needs to be done. The specifications, often in the form of a project manual, are in narrative form. They contain some of the general and more specific conditions and the bid form. So depending on who your design professional is, you may have an architect who may be involved in some interior renovations. They would typically prepare specifications that have to do with the building itself, the floor plans, elevations, which is the view of the side of the building, or sections of the building, which is a graphical view that's a cut through the building, so you can sort of quote unquote see inside the building and what needs to be done. or the engineer may be a civil or structural engineer, or even what's called an MEP engineer, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer, who would be responsible for such things as HVAC and water supply, things of those to that nature. So the specifications, as I mentioned, are the written portion of the construction documents. And it lays out the general and specific conditions, such as things that may include where the contractor may keep his equipment during a project, or what kind of warranties are required for the contractor to provide. It also describes in narrative form the scope of the project and what the qualifications of the contractor need to be for that project. They also contains the bid form the contractor will fill out with their pricing, and that actually becomes, if that contractor is selected, that actually becomes an attachment to the contract, because that's the basis for the pricing of the contract. So to be clear, the specifications in the bid documents that include the design drawings and the written specifications, they are meant to convey to the contractor the work that needs to be done. How the work is executed, the means and methods of that work is the contractor's responsibility. So there's often some confusion that if the engineer is overseeing the work under the scope of work that is the contract administration scope, that they're responsible to make sure that the contractor's crews are working, or that the asphalt is the right temperature. That's not what we do, and we'll talk about that a little later, what that division of labor is. But the contractor is responsible for the means of construction, what equipment they're going to use, the methods of construction, how they may shore something or stage something, or protect the area of work. That all falls under the contractor's purview. So in the bid package, there is the request for proposal, or here it's called the advertisement for bid. And when we do specifications, we include a cover letter that describes when the bids, or what the project is, when the owner anticipates doing that project, when the bids are due, who the bids should be submitted to, and ask that if they're not going to bid, if they would kindly notify the person who is issuing the request for proposal. So sometimes there's also instruction to bidders. In some cases, there is a pre-bid meeting. So if it's a project where there's going to be a walkthrough of contractors before they provide bids, it may be done as a group, where there's a specific day that is arranged for all the contractors to meet on site and walk through with either the design engineer or the owner's representative to discuss what work is going to be done, and to take any questions that the contractors may have regarding those bids. In some cases, though, there is not a set day where everyone meets on site, but the contractor is responsible to contact the owner's representative and to make arrangements to come and have a look at the site so that they could submit a bid. And if they have any technical questions about the specifications, we put in our bid documents to contact the engineer. If there's any other type of questions that are not technical questions, they may be directed to the property manager. Also included in the project manual, as I mentioned, is the bid proposal form, and we'll talk about the format of that. And then there's different documentation that sometimes may be included. It's often included once contractors are selected, though, such as certificates of ownership and insurance. So there, as I mentioned, there are general and special conditions within the bid documents. So these conditions are very important to have reviewed and to make them part of the contract, because they define the relationship between the parties and who is responsible for what, who is responsible for notifying tenants, for example, of the project schedule. Also, the method of payment. Is it going to be invoiced as the work is completed? Are there milestone payments, such as a third, and a third? So the conditions within the project documents will define these types of things. Sometimes there is a request for a defined project schedule. As you see, there's a comment there that it's rarely used, especially for outdoor projects such as roofing and pavement. We always ask the contractor for an anticipated duration of work, but if there are projects where weather may affect that project schedule, it's very hard to hold a contractor to a schedule where they're being affected by weather and to penalize them for that. So we do ask the contractors for how long they think that they may need to complete a particular project, but it's rarely used that there's a project schedule that's defined within the contract. Also, I want to mention about retainage. So when the contractor invoices the owner for the work that's being done, at the point of substantial completion of the project, when everything is done and they're invoicing for that final payment, oftentimes there is a retainage that's held until a final walkthrough can be completed with the owner and the engineer and the contractor. And then if there are any items that need to be addressed before that final retainage is released, that percentage is held on to. It's oftentimes 8% or 10%. And then once all the punch list items are satisfied after the project is completed, that retainage is released. Other types of conditions that might be included in the bid documents are insurance requirements. If there's any sort of what happens if somebody's injured on site, or what happens if there's a fender bender, or something goes wrong, there's damage somewhere. So those insurance requirements are spelled out in the conditions. That's something also the attorney should review in preparing the contract between the contractor and the owner. So I have a question here. Could you include foundations? I need a little clarification on that. You mean in common elements? That would be spelled out in the governing documents, which spells out the common elements. In some cases of a multi-unit building, for example, a foundation may be included. So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that a little more if I haven't addressed that. Okay, so some other items that are included. Indemnification. So if there is any sort of some damage, that the contractor will indemnify the parties that are involved. Okay, so also what's included, I mentioned, is the bid form. So the schedule of values that, as I mentioned, the bid form, once the contractor fills that out, that becomes part of the contract that's included in the contract. So that would include the base costs and unit pricing. So let me elaborate on that a little bit. Base costs are for the pricing for items that you absolutely need to get done during a project. So just for example, in terms of a roadway project, you have to mill the surface of that roadway. You have to put new asphalt back onto that roadway. There may also be other items that are known to be part of the project, such as maybe there may be some areas of sidewalk ramp replacements that need to happen, or repairs to roadway drainage catch basins, or replacement of grates or curb pieces that are items that are definitely items that need to get done during the project. That goes into the base bid section. And so the contractor will give pricing on that, and there'll be a lump sum at the end that includes all those items that belong in the base bid. And then unit pricing is the section of the bid form where those are items that may be encountered. They may be unforeseen items that are typically encountered during a project. Again, using a roadway project as an example, once you mill the surface of the roadway off, you can see things that you cannot see before that surface is removed, such as areas of the base course that may be weak, or that needs to be reinforced or reconstructed. Once you take the grates and the steel off of a catch basin, you may see damage that was not apparent before the contractor started the work. So the unit pricing is meant to capture those items that are most often encountered during a specific type of project. In the case of roofing, it may be that when they remove those roof shingles and the sheathing is exposed, there may be areas of sheathing that are soft or water damaged, or have other problems where it needs to be replaced. So and that can't be determined until that the surface materials are removed. So the unit pricing would probably, for a roofing project, have an item in there for roof sheathing, and for flashing, for those items that may need to be added to the project afterwards. So when we review bids, there's usually we've done enough projects that we can get an idea of what might fall in as an extra in the project. It may or may not happen that way, but just for example, a roadway project, typically, in addition to the base cost, which, as you may recall, I mentioned is everything that needs to get done on that project, include a 15% to 20% contingency for items beyond that base bid that may need to be done, that are unforeseen conditions. And the unit pricing, it gives you a way to see what those costs might be, so it's not a surprise. And then also during a project, there may be aspects to the project that are added. Oftentimes I see to pavement projects, there are sidewalks that are added to the project while it's in progress. So there may be things that may be added as you go along. Also, for example, again, using a pavement project, because I do a lot of those, as you can tell, there may be changes when you're invoiced in material costs. Asphalt is when the contractor gives pricing for asphalt, it's based on the asphalt index, and then when you're actually invoiced for the asphalt material used in the project, that cost may increase or decrease depending upon what the asphalt index has done. So let's see, I've got another question here. Oh, in regard to the foundations, I'm requesting to include in your discussion foundations as a common element of a single family home and a condo association, where a major repair is planned. That sounds like a specific condition. I mean, if you want to give me a call, we can discuss that after the presentation. That sounds like a very specific condition. yeah, please feel free to contact me. I can give you my email. Okay, so here's an example of request for payment, application for payment. This is a very standard form, and this is what a contractor will submit when they are done with the project or a certain portion of the project, and they're invoicing. Oftentimes that could be monthly, that could be, and it's defined by the contract. It could be an invoice monthly, it could be an invoice for 50% of the project, or an invoice when all work is complete if the project moves fairly quickly. But this particular document, this AIA document, lays out, and it uses that original bid that was in the bid package, and it breaks down the contract sums and then compares them. Let's see. This is just an example here of what the second page of that might look like, and without getting into too much detail here, it shows what the original cost of that item is, the percentage of work that was completed, what was being invoiced to date, and then there is, on that first sheet, there's a breakdown of what's being charged and how much is remaining in the project. And then this would be submitted to the engineer. The engineer would compare this document, what's being requested in this document, to the original bid. There may be some other background analysis that goes on, and then the engineer will approve it for payment. So in this one, you can see item 6 here, total earned less retainage. And we mentioned that retainage before, where a certain amount, a certain percentage of the project is held back until the project is totally complete and any concerns have been addressed. So there are different costing methods, different ways of submitting prices for the project that's being done. There's lump sum pricing, meaning that it's not per square foot or square yard or per piece or per ton. The contractor may be requested to provide a lump sum, meaning this they'll provide a cost for the whole project without any quantities involved or anything like that. Unit pricing is different in that we may be requesting square foot pricing or square yard pricing. It's per piece pricing. Time and materials is another way to of cost that's often used by engineers during the contract administration phase, because we don't know what the contractor's schedule may be, or how often we may be required to be on site. So there are hourly rates where an engineer, for example, may bill by time and materials. So there are different costing structures. So performance bonds and deposits are not really something that's encountered very much in community association projects. A performance bond is sort of an insurance. It's a deposit into an escrow that if for any reason the contractor goes out of business or walks off the project, that there is money in that escrow to complete the project. Community association projects are usually not of the scale where that is required. I will tell you that engineers for community associations typically have a bid list of contractors that they have done multiple projects with, and I know Kipcon will only use contractors that we know do quality work, that have an interest in satisfying the owners of the project. So performance bonds and deposits, not really something you run into too much with community association work. And again, in those contract documents, there would be any kind of guarantees or warranties. So again, using our roadway project, typically once a contractor leaves the site, there's a warranty of a 1 year period, for example. Sometimes it might be a 2 year period, but 1 year period is more common. It's not very common for an asphalt contractor to want to go beyond that. But what that will ensure is that within a year after they leave the site and that project is completed, if there's any sort of damage or deterioration that happens as a result of the workmanship, that they will address that. So that time period is spelled out in the contract documents. Also, what type of communication is required once the project is in motion? If an engineer has a contract administration contract, one of the means of communications are field reports. So if an engineer goes out to the site and has a discussion with the contractor on a particular day and is reviewing the work, comparing it to the specifications they've prepared, or if there's any special issues that come up during the course of the work, that gets documented in the field report and submitted to the owner for each field visit. So that type of communication is spelled out in the scope of work. Or if there's a specific type of communication between the contractor and any of the other parties. For example, the contractor is responsible to notify the engineer of their schedule or any changes in the schedule. So those communications are very important. I will tell you that when we do remediation projects with community associations, that during contract administration, I always insist that all parties are copied on any communication, including the contractor, the owner, and Kipcon, so that nothing gets lost in translation, or there's a separate conversation, say between the engineer and the contractor, that doesn't get conveyed to the owner. It's very important to have good communication during a project. And coordination of permits and inspections. So there may be certain types of projects where the township may be required to come out and inspect, or a permit may be required from the township, a permit approval. And sometimes the engineer may be responsible to get a building permit in place. Sometimes the contractor may be responsible for that. Oftentimes, if work is in progress and there is a township inspection that's required, the contractor will be responsible for that. And again, that's all spelled out in the contract documents so that there's no miscommunication. Okay, there's a couple of questions here, so I'll just, is it advisable to factor estimated labor costs into a reserve study update? So labor with reserve studies, the unit pricing that Kipcon uses factors that in. It's the unit costs that we use also include a portion of that is our labor costs, so that is included in those costs. It says, is there a dollar amount or range that a site would need a more detailed spec and use of AIA forms? For example, a $100,000 court rebuild project. Yeah, so it's always advisable to have specifications prepared, and you'll see in the next couple of slides that it keeps the comparison between contractors comparable across the board. You're not getting 4 different contractor bids on something that may all have different scopes of work. So when you're getting into larger projects that have a lot of moving parts, or a lot of different steps in the construction sequence, it's always advisable to have a detailed spec prepared. AIA forms, sometimes they're written into the contract, sometimes they're not. I've done them both ways, where sometimes AIA forms are submitted, and we will use that in reviewing the invoice. Sometimes it's not specifically in the contract, and the contractor will just give us an invoice on their letterhead, which we will then review. So it's
Sandy, it's Mary Ellen Sachs. How are you? Good. I have a stupid question. I had to cancel Dr. Perrin to another date because I have to go to court for work, not for me. So his appointment is February 27th.
I'm sorry, your mic is on. Who's ever on the phone? That's okay. Okay, now one more question. Are there standardized specs for routine or frequent projects such as concrete replacement, painting, and catch basins? That's an excellent question. Actually, yes, there are general specs that can be prepared. If it's a repetitive type of project where what you are remediating or replacing is very much the same, a general specification can be prepared for use whenever you need to do that type of replacement. Absolutely, that can be done. If it's something unique to that site, then no, it's not. For example, again, let's stick with our pavement spec. The condition of pavement changes over time. So we oftentimes will do phased specifications where in 3 consecutive years, different portions of that community are being done. But we recommend that you don't go beyond 3 years because the conditions on that site are changing. So if it's something where the work in the specification is based on the current condition of something or the current placement of something, then a generalized spec wouldn't work. But yes, in some cases that absolutely is something you can use. So for getting back to our presentation, so when we put out the RFP, there are certain qualifications that are required of the bidding contractors. Oftentimes we will put in items such as they have to be licensed in the state that they're doing the work, and that license has to be current. That's pretty important. The contractor's experience. They may do paving, but they may not be used to a large pavement project or a large drainage project. So many pavers, the pavers that we use are able to also do stormwater drainage projects. So that's very important. If you've got a roadway project that requires new drainage to be put in, you don't only want a contractor that can do the pavement. You want a contractor that can also do that drainage work as well, so you don't have to find a separate contractor. So that experience is important. For roofing projects, if there's a certain type of product that's being put in that its performance is based on the way that it's constructed and being installed properly, oftentimes a certified inspector will need to come out to that site, or a certified contractor that is versed in putting those materials on, those certain roofing materials, for example. They need to be certified to put on those materials, so it's ensured that they do it properly. So there is that pre-qualification for the contractors that are bidding on your project: their experience, their certifications, and their licensing. So we discussed the pre-bid conference. Sometimes that you can do it on site. I've been to bid meetings where all the bidders show up on a given day and we do a walkthrough, or else, as I mentioned, they are more often responsible to contact the owner's representative to get on site to have a look at what they're going to be working on. So then once we receive the bids, and I'm going to move fairly quickly through the rest of this, just in the interest of time. So when we receive the bids, we'll put together a bid summary. And here's an example of a bid summary in the bottom right-hand corner here. And as you can see, we will have in different columns the different contractors who have bid on the project. And you'll see along the left side there, you see where it says base bid. We talked about the base bid and how those are the portions of the project that we know need to get done. So this is an example of a base bid summary. And as you can see, going across for each item, each component of that construction sequence, there's a separate line. And each contractor provides a cost on each of those items across the board. And you can look across that line item and see the different pricing that the contractors have. You can see the subtotal summaries and the total at the end, the total project cost for that base bid. So it's a very easy way of summarizing the project and to having a look at a glance, kind of condensing the large volume of pricing information that you're getting in, and helps you make a decision without too much going back and forth between documents. Another a good reason to do a bid summary, or to have an engineer do a bid summary, is you could look to see, you may see that one contractor, the pricing is way off, and you can ask them about it. You know, for example, if they're way high on a line item. You know, I've had instances where I'll call the contractor and say, you know, can you take a look at this? Is this what you intended? And they may look at it and realize that the math was bad on that particular line item, or they may come back and say, that's the cost I can do it for. That's my number. So so we can see anomalies. We can see items that we might want to go back and question the contractor on. Now, after all bids are received, oftentimes if it's a large project, and the association has extra questions for the contractors beyond just the bid return, they will set up contractor interviews and have one contractor come in after another and give each half-hour slot and ask the different questions of the contractors that they might want to ask. So that helps to narrow down which contractors an association feels are suitable for the project, and ultimately who they want to work with. So once the contract is, once you've selected a contractor, you can negotiate different aspects of that contractor. And again, that has to do, that can play into, you can have the attorney involved in that. So that's the part before you actually have the settle a contract between the owner and the contractor. You want to make sure that all the parts in that contract and all the things that are agreed upon both parties are in agreement, so that there are no surprises. Okay, so we talked about the contracts a little earlier. So as I mentioned, there's a separate contract between the community association and the engineer, and the community association and their contractor. So when you decide you're going to do a project, you'll go to a number of engineers or one engineer and ask for a proposal for that work. So that proposal, if accepted, and in that proposal are the payment terms, any type of insurance items, what the deliverables are on that project. Are we providing design specifications and a project manual? Are we, is the engineer doing bidding? Will they be involved in contract administration? So that's all in the engineer's proposal. And then once that proposal is executed, that becomes the contract between the community association and the engineer. And then once the specifications are prepared and it's gone out to bid and the bids have come back and you've selected a contractor, then is the time to put together your contract with the contractor. So again, same thing, the payment terms in there, any kind of warranties. We discussed the example of a year warranty on pavement, any type of insurance requirements for worker injuries, damage to property, vehicle insurance, things of those natures. The schedule of work, again, not often included as a strict schedule, but sometimes just a general duration of work may be considered. And of course, the scope of work to be performed. What is the contractor going to do as the base portion of work, and how will any sort of extras or surprises on the contract be handled? So, and this is very true. The problems arise when there's something that's not included in the contract. When things are included in the contract, it's very clear, and that's why you want the contract in place. And oftentimes projects go so smoothly that there's really you're not referring to the contract every portion of the contract all the time. It's usually projects go, if you have a good contractor, the project goes fairly smoothly and there are no issues. But when problems do occur and there are conflict, it is most often because there's no clearly defined way to address that in the contract. So again, with the owner and the engineer contract, our scope of work as the engineer is typically to prepare the construction documents and the bid package. Another component of that is to actually provide bidding services in which the RFP is sent out and the bids are analyzed and recommendations are made to the owner. And then contract administration is when construction is in progress. And the contract administration, again, as I mentioned earlier, the contractor is responsible for the means and methods of construction, not the engineer. The engineer during contract administration, their role as defined in the scope of work is typically to compare the work that the contractor is doing to the contract documents, specifically the specifications, and, the directions in constructing something. So we're making general comparison to what the contractor is doing to what the design is. Also, we review the invoices as we discussed at length earlier, and any field visits we document in field reports, and that's provided to the owner. And then at the end of the project, we do a walkthrough with the owner and the contractor and our office, and again, any items that are outstanding that the owner might be dissatisfied with, or which are truly construction defects, need to be addressed before that final payment is released. And the owner contractor contract, again, separate from the engineer's contract, also similarly describes the work to be performed in that contract. And we just discussed contract administration. And again, the contractor is responsible for the means and the methods of that work. So the contractor is ultimately responsible for what is constructed. All right, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to take any questions because we only have a few minutes left, so I can turn my attention fully to any questions you may have. Is there anything that we can discuss here now? Okay, I'm gonna keep moving forward. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat or contact me separately. Oh, we have a statement here, convincing boards to use engineers. Again, the best way I think to present that to a board is to present it as the benefit of being able to compare contractor pricing. I mean, I've seen I've gotten calls from property managers where they would like to send me 5 different bids from 5 different contractors with 5 different scopes and ask me to recommend a contractor for them. That's an impossibility because if the scopes are all different, you know, you have 5 different contractors with 5 different ideas about what needs to be done with 5 different scopes of pricing. That's a problem. So the benefit of having an engineer involved in doing specs is that there's an organized way and an organized approach to making the decision. Plus, you've had an engineer look at that component and come up with a design for remediation. It's not 5 different designs. It's something for contractors to focus on and to and a path forward that's clearly defined for the project. Oh, I didn't do the code word. We usually do a code word. Okay, the code word is contract documents.
Actually, I already put it in the
you
thing,
did?
Melissa, for Kipcon. It's Kipcon.
Oh, it's Kipcon. Okay, scratch that. Our code word for today is Kipcon. Thank you, Jody. Okay, I have another question here. When an association has a contract with a hard to find replace contractor, and the contractor is charging for more than the contract includes, what do you recommend? So again, with contract administration, having an engineer involved during the contract process is also good, because the contract, we have it in our contract documents that anything that is above and beyond that base contract, that it needs to be approved by the engineer. So you have another set of eyes looking at what the contractor is recommending, and will either agree or disagree with that. So when a contractor starts the work and says you need extra work to be done, it's hard oftentimes for the board of an association to decide if that's something that's really A, needed, or B, wanted. So it's good to have an engineer involved in contract administration to help with those types of decisions. All right. And it looks like we don't have any more questions. Again, if you have any questions that you think of afterward, please feel free to contact Jody. She'll put you in touch with me, and I'm happy to discuss anything we've discussed in the webinar, or any upcoming projects that you might have that you might want to discuss. And all, thank you very much for your time today. And I hope this was informative for you.